Welcome back to Let's Make a Game. In this video, I'm going to show you some ways that you can make better use of the sidebar, this section of the screen over here. You might notice that in this example program, which as usual you can download from the itch.io link in the description, there are several features present or missing that are different to what you would normally expect. First of all, there's some text in the sidebar. And secondly, you might notice that normally the title of the story appears up here in big bold letters, and it's not there. And you might also notice that there are some buttons missing. Normally there are buttons that allow you to go back and forth in the story, and there's another button that allows you to collapse the sidebar. So you click it and the sidebar sort of moves all the way over here, and then if you do that you can click it again and it'll come back out. And that is also missing. So I'm going to show you how to do all of those things. We also have a bit of text here that tells you where to find the code that does particular things. So the code to hide the story title is in Stylesheet. The code to remove the option to collapse the sidebar is also in Stylesheet. The code to remove the back and forth buttons is in JavaScript. And it says here, any code in the story caption passage is executed inside the sidebar. So let's take a look at the code and find out what all that means. So let's start by going to the style sheet. So we have two bits of code here. Hashtag story-title, curly brackets, display, colon, space, none, none, semicolon, and then close the curly brackets. This particular command gets rid of, as you might expect, the story title, the name of the story. Normally it will appear in large bold letters. Do this and it won't. This command is almost exactly the same, except instead of story title, it's UI-bar-toggle, T-O-G-G-L-E, and that is the button that allows you to collapse and expand the sidebar. All right, let's have a look in JavaScript. In JavaScript, we have this command we've talked about before, which means that returns in the code don't turn into returns on the screen. But we also have a new one, config.history.maxStates equals 1. And config and states are in, or start with a capital letter, and that is important. You do need to have the right capital letters and lowercase letters. What this does is, by default, the story keeps track of every stage of what happened in the story, and that's what allows you to go back. This says, well, we're only going to have a maximum of one state, the current state, that's in memory, and therefore, of course, you won't be able to go back because it won't remember what was previously the case. And if that's the case, then it removes the back and forth buttons. Now, we have two passages here. One says start. That's a normal passage. There's nothing to talk about in there that we haven't talked about before, but this is new. We have a passage called story caption, capital S, T-O-R-Y, capital C, A-P-T-I-O-N, no space between the two, and all of those things are necessary. If you have a passage that's exactly called story caption, like that, whatever is in here will execute in the sidebar every time you go to a new passage. And that's what allows you to put text in the sidebar. Often I find that it is a good idea to have character sheet type information in the sidebar. What I mean by that is if you have attributes for the character, if you're keeping track of how much gold the character has, if you're keeping track of what item the character has, that sort of thing tends to be the sort of stuff that you put in the sidebar. There's also a note here that says, remember that any variable names used here shouldn't be used anywhere else in the story. That's quite important because let's say you're using, as I often do, $Z as a temporary variable, and let's say you use $Z in story caption. Well, you might have some code in the main game where you need to keep track of the value of Z from one passage to the next. And if you use $Z here, that will change the value of Z, and therefore the program won't work in the way that you want it to. So what I often do is, if I have to use variables in here, I call them $SBZ, so SB for sidebar. So instead of Z, Y, and X, I'll use $SBZ, SBY, SBX, and so on. And I'll make sure not to use anything beginning with SB in the main game, and therefore we don't get any unwanted interaction between story caption and the main part of the game. So those are some ways that you can make better use of the sidebar. I will leave it there for now. I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.